let's build something. Today we're going to build a leather-bound book. Now, as we all know, a good book starts with good paper. Now, I could go to a craft store and get a book of hard cardstock, but those don't have lines, and I'm an idiot who can't write well without lines. I start going kind of like that. So I got on the laptop and I created a Word document. All I did was create two graphs and then delete the lines from the sides so that I basically have lined paper. So now I have to go print 100 pages of lined paper. Now that I have these pages printed, I have to fold them in half, and let me show you something pretty cool about this. So when you take a paper and fold it in half, you now have 4 pages from the one paper. With 100 pages in the book, I'll have 400 pages, and I plan to write in this weekly. That'll give me just under 8 years of writing time. So, let's get to folding. Now, in order to get really nice, crisp folds on this, you need to take your time and make sure the corners are lined up, pull out, flatten it, and then I'm using a spoon to go over it and make that fold really nice and crisp. There is a specialty tool for doing this. I believe it's called a bone fold. Not quite sure on that, but just a regular old spoon will work. Now that they're all folded, I need to make 10-page stacks called signatures. A signature doesn't have to be 10 pages, but I had 10 signatures of 10 pages, so I thought that would work out nicely. Signatures are usually 5 to 8 pages, but you'll have to do a lot more sewing. Now, I don't have a book press, but I do have leftover flooring pieces that are really flat, and a carboy full of a home brew that should do the trick. For my next step, I'm going to be sewing the actual pages together, and to do that, I needed to make a jig. So, I went out to the shop and I made this little fella. Just a frame, quick and dirty, held together with glue and brad nails. This will sit on the table. I'll be able to clamp it down and use this to sew my pages. Next, I need to measure where the spines are going to be. And poke holes in the signatures for the stitches to pass through. This is one of the upsides to having less signatures. Then it was time to tie the twine. I tied the first strand very tight, then wrapped the rest around the first strand to fatten it up. Finally, it came time to sew. I'm not an expert on this, so I'll link a great resource to learn how to do this. But very basically, I'm going out of one of the holes I poked, wrapping around the twine, then going back through the same hole. Then I used some spare tile to act as a book press. Once I let it rest for a little bit, it was time to go over the spine with glue. I'm just using wood glue that I had on hand, but any PVA will work. Once the glue dried, I cut the twine, then I glued down a burlap material to help strengthen the spine. Then another layer of PVA glue. Then I cut down some foam core to use as a structure for the cover. I drilled some holes, then got to work attaching the foam core. I cut the twine to a consistent length, then unraveled the twine. I glued it down as flat as I could. Finally, it was the part I was excited for, attaching the leather. I always use contact cement when using leather. I set it in place and held it down while she tied strings around the ribs. I got that idea from the source linked in the description. Once the spine was dry, I was able to glue the rest of the cover down. I trimmed the edges, then used a skiving knife to thin out the material so I could fold it over. Then I glued the edges over. I grouped the edges then pierced my holes for stitching. I use this tool because it uses blades to pierce through the material instead of punching holes. I made that decision based on the amount of material I had to go through. Then came lots and lots of stitching, with regular breaks to pet the dog. The downside of using the tool to pierce the holes rather than a hole punch is that I now have to use an awl to widen each hole for each stitch. Once the stitching was done, I started working on the strap. I cut a hole for the buckle, then I secured it in place using contact cement and a matching rivet. I decided to stitch the strap, so I grooved it, punched my holes, then lots more stitching. Then secured it to the book using rivets. This build is finished, so let's talk about mistakes. First off, the leather I used is way too thick, and when I inevitably make another one, I'm going to be using thinner leather. Next mistake is I used super glue, or CA glue, to hold down the twine while I worked it. As a simple clamp, basically, and what that did is it hardened the twine, and there's an exothermic reaction when CA glue dries, and it ended up burning some of the twine. It also stiffens the twine so much that I have this little problem right in here. The twine right there isn't flexible enough to move. Thank you all for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, I'd really appreciate it if you would hit the like button. I'd also love to hear what you thought about this build in the comments below. You have a great day.